Okay, just before I'd like to welcome everyone to this iTDi Global webinar. My name is Stephen Herder. I'm sitting next to my good friend John Fanselow. And John, if you want to introduce that preparation for the activity, then I will make some announcements before you can take over with the regular webinar, okay?
All right. So I should ask them to do the associations?
Yeah, explain what you just explained a moment ago.
I'm
Yeah.
not going to greet you now, people, not because I'm impolite, but I want to discuss greetings and leave-taking a little later in the discussion. The first thing I'd like to start with is to ask each of you privately to write down at least 3 phrases that come to your mind when you either hear or read the phrase breaking rules. Then after you all do it privately, then I'd like you to start sharing it on the chat page, and then we can compare what different people think and discuss, because this theme is very central, obviously, to the course. So we want to constantly come back to the meaning that we attribute to breaking rules. So please write your associations. Don't think about it too much. The things that come quickly to your mind, that's what I'm interested in.
Thank you, John. Okay, and everybody, welcome to this iTDI Global webinar. It's been a little while since we've had one, but we're very happy to have this one this evening as the first of 5 sessions with John Fanselow. And I'm going to just turn off my webcam and move John back over into the driver's seat. And if I just want to show you over on the left side, it says iTDI links. And this webinar this evening is open to everyone, but the next 4 weeks are a closed online course that John's doing. So 5 sessions in total, this first one being open to everyone. If you click on register for more breaking rules, and then below you can click on the browse to button. And I'm just going to show this to you. It's going to happen. It takes you
Marwa from Egypt just came on and already typed some phrases that came to mind on the chat. So Steve, right, so thank you. So the rest of you might as well start
Sorry
typing.
about that, John. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
back.
we've got stepping out of the box, creativity and critical thinking, interesting, wrong judgment. It means I can review it later. Provocative, rebellious, essence of being. Huh. Out of your comfort zone. Essence of being. That's a new one. A thrilling feeling of freedom, curiosity about what rules are meant to be broken, creativity and fun. Non-traditional, unconventional. Awakening the dragon. fear. So far we've got one thing that, well, maybe two. Fear, wrong. Those are two that might be. Tearing down walls and barriers, terrifying. Punishment. The number of words that people or phrases that are writing that are kind of negative is naughty, is not so large. Now, not following the standard set. Now, would you just now write at least one reason why you think I asked you to make these associations? Why did I suggest or ask you to make these associations with breaking rules, instead of starting by saying what I mean by breaking rules, for example? So what could be a couple of reasons why I started with your free associations? You can start typing those right on the chat now. Alan says the sound is coming in and out. Is that with anybody else?
Alan's actually on a mobile phone, so that might be a big problem.
I see.
If Alan is also seeing your picture, then
Right.
down at the bottom right corner of John's face, the box with John's is a pause button. If anybody has problems with the sound, you should pause John's video and just get the sound. Sorry, John, go ahead.
Yeah. So to provide thinking instead of answers, to think about the reasons why we do not break rules. By doing this, you help us create meaning, says Josette. An eco from Hungary, to see what kind of connotations do we associate to breaking rules. Personalize the meaning. The cherry, personalize the meaning. All of the comments that you've made now, that everyone has made, could perhaps be summarized with Cherry's comment, which is personalize the meaning, because those schools are set up as if everybody is the same. In fact, as you well know, everyone is totally different and an individual. So you each have your own associations and your own meaning of breaking rules. And for some of you, it's all positive. For some, it's partly positive and partly negative. For some, it's quite negative. Now, I just want you to listen as I say that the subtitle of my book, Breaking Rules, is Generating and Exploring Alternatives in Language Teaching. And no one that I've ever asked to make associations with breaking rules has ever written that subtitle. And I think that's because that subtitle is not congruent with the main title, Breaking Rules. Because if it were congruent, then more people would write that when they think of breaking rules, they think of exploration, and they think of comparing what they do with something new that they're doing and looking at the results. So my purpose in writing the book, my purpose of this course, is to remind you that a central purpose, in addition to the ones you all listed, is to generate alternatives, and then explore the difference between what you normally do and the alternative. So I try to emphasize that because it tends to put it in a slightly more positive light. Now, just to backtrack a little, there are rules of the road, for example, and personally, I don't think they should be broken. And there are rules of hygiene, like you should wash your hands quite frequently to prevent the spread of disease. So not all rules, I think, are in the same category. The rules that I'm talking about are unconscious rules that we follow in the classroom that we're not aware of. And that's another word that I'd like you to associate with rules, and that is out of consciousness or subconscious. If you look at 100 videotapes of teachers, 90% of them will say okay after every few sentences when they change the topic, for example. I have never seen a lesson plan where the teacher writes down, say okay when you change the topic. It's out of consciousness. And when the teachers see the video or even just listen to an audio, they say, oh, gee, I can't believe how frequently I'm saying okay. So another meaning for rules is subconscious behaviors that we're not aware of. We're not aware of. And in order to generate and explore alternatives, the first thing we have to do is to look at what we're doing. Now, would you just write down, is there anything that I just said that was new to you or kind of different from what you had thought before? And if it is, just put it up on the chat screen, please. Now, Nino, just a slight point. I didn't say the teachers say it too many times. I just said the teachers say it out of consciousness, and they tend to say it when they introduce a new topic. So another belief I have about rules is that we should not judge them as good or bad. So if you say okay a lot when you change topic, that's a rule that you follow. I don't want to say that's either good or bad. I want to just say, well, if you decrease the number, what might be the effect? So another thing that I associate with rules is analysis rather than judgment. Analysis rather than judgment. And most people, when they think of rules, they think of judgment. So that's a big problem with the title of my book and the title of this course, because rules, many people associate with making judgments, which is totally the opposite of my intention. But breaking rules, thank you, Sherry, but breaking rules is a conscious behavior, yes. But following the initial rules is not so conscious. And that's another reason that I think it's important to break them, because we become more aware then of the rules that we're following subconsciously. So breaking rules is a conscious behavior, in contrast to following the rules, which tends to be out of consciousness or subconscious. I know students who would call their teachers by the words they tend to repeat frequently. Yes, that's Rima. Where are you from? I don't see it here. Algeria. I've seen that in different places, right? So they call the teacher like Mr. Repetition or Mr. Okay, very good, or Ms. Okay, very good. So Rima, thank you for bringing that point out. So keeping rules, yes, is an unconscious behavior. Yeah, you notice that you didn't say following rules, you said keeping rules. I think rules are very personal, so in fact, keeping is probably a stronger word to describe the power of rules over our behavior. Keeping instead of following. Following is like not as strong. So thank you for using that word. I didn't think of it. rules become automatic. Yeah, maybe automatic is better than unconscious or subconscious because that makes it look as if we're on drugs or something in the classroom rather than just doing these things automatically. So automatic rather than subconscious. Ritual, routine, I think those are better than subconscious also. So automatic things we do, automatic behaviors, rituals, routines. I've used rituals a lot. What some people associate with rituals is somewhat religious. So routines perhaps is more neutral than ritual. And then Kumiko says to make students surprised when we break the rule. Right. And then Liz says we're talking about habits. Habits are hard to break. No question, habits are hard to break. And that's why one of the themes, as you'll see both tonight and if you take the course, we talk about making very, very, very small changes in our habits or our routines or keeping of our rules. So if you always stand in front of the classroom, sit down, even for 5 minutes. That's a very small habit, but it shows that you can change the habit. And when you change one or two habits like that you can change, then it makes it easier to change others that are more complicated. We need Leslie from Australia. Where are you in Australia? Just curious. I've just been there a few times, Adelaide and Brisbane. Canberra. Sorry I haven't been there. Anyway, well, we need to know what the rules are to consciously break them, no question. Small changes, definitely manageable. Now, I was in Booty, where are you? Who just came and said hello, hi everyone. Booty, varying the senators of class make them more enjoyable for everyone. Could I just stop for this? Elena's varying the scenario. One way to change our habits is to change the scenario. So, for example, if you always have the lights on in your classroom, you can have the lights off. If you usually have the students facing the front of the classroom with their chairs, you can have them turn to look out the window. And changing that scenario will enable both the students and you, again, out of consciousness, to act slightly differently. So one of the things I'm going to emphasize in my sessions as we go on is to record what we do, look at what we do, transcribe it, and then make small changes in the behaviors or the routines. But what Elena has just said is another option is to vary the scenario. And if you vary the scenario, automatically, some of the things that you do will have to change. If the lights are out, if the students are looking out the window instead of on the at the whiteboard or the blackboard or the green board, that means you're going to have to write less because it's a different scenario. So, Elena, thank you for that kind of important insight to help us get out of the routine. Woody is our friend from Indonesia. All right. Now, I want to go to, I said before that I didn't want to, just before we do this, I was at an airport a few weeks ago and I saw this book. It's called First Break All the Rules. First Break All the Rules. And the other book I saw a couple months later, Whatever You Think the Opposite. Now, what fields do you think these two books were written for? First Break All the Rules, Whatever You Think the Opposite. I'm just curious. I picked them up so I could find out right away what area the authors were aiming for. Who were the people? It wasn't teachers, incidentally. The only book that I know of called Breaking Rules for Teachers is mine, because I'm the only crazy person in the field. But First Break All the Rules, Whatever You Think the Opposite. Who do you think Sherry, is it Sherry? Self-improvement management. Alan Davis, business. Suzanne, business. Well, that's it. That's it. Business thought. IT, business. So, yeah, I I found out very quickly by looking at the book jacket that they were talking to business people. Now, before we continue, I said before that I didn't want you to think that I was impolite, that I didn't greet you. Now, could you write down the greeting that you use in your country and what it means in English? We'll just get a few. We don't not have to everybody, but we'll just see which ones come up first. Oh, Marwa, I'm going to tell you about the peacock. So I'll write that down. The peacock on the cover. A lot of people ask about that, but so far you were the only one tonight. But many people probably have it in their mind. So thank you for writing it down. So Dina in Indonesia, it's how are you? Salamat malam. Good evening. And then, oh, India, namaste. In Nepal, they said that too. I salute you. Good day. Good day. Good day. Welcome, everyone. Well, I spent a couple of years in Somalia, and in Somalia, they say NABAD. I guess I could type. I haven't typed a word yet. Usually I'm typing like mad. Nabad. It may be spelled incorrectly. Anyway, it means peace. Then when I was in good morning, how are you in Turkey? Hello, Vietnam. I can't spell this correctly, so I'm just going to say it, but when I was in Senegal, there we go, Marwa, that's what they say the same thing, Salam Alaikum. I can't spell it, you spelled it. They say Salam Alaikum. In Somali, the Somalis say Nabad, which is peace. And in Israel, they say Shalom, I think. Anyway, when I was there, I heard that. So one question is, when you say good day, in America, we don't say good day to greet people, but after we greet them and they leave, we say have a good day, which is the same thing in a way. And the irony is that, in fact, often people do not have a good day because things are in pretty bad shape in a lot of places. And in the places where they say Salam Alaikum, there's a lot of war going on. So one of the lessons from this is the same lesson as what we're going to talk about when we talk about looking at our classrooms and trying to understand what we're doing. And that is that the words we use so frequently that they cease to reflect any meaning of what actually is going on. So, for example, the teacher says, I have just provided very rich, meaningful input. And after a while, we use that term so much that we believe that we're providing rich, meaningful input without any checking to see if, in fact, it's either rich or meaningful or if anyone has any idea what we're saying. So, as you talk about your teaching and use terms, one of the things I'm going to invite you to do is write down the term and then write 2 columns on a piece of paper. And on the left-hand side, write the term, and then write down examples in the class that are rich, meaningful input. And then on the right-hand side, you have another column, and it says not rich, meaningful input. And you see how many examples you have in each column. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is to say how is the rich meaningful input, not rich and not meaningful? And how is the material that you thought was not rich and meaningful, perhaps rich and meaningful? In other words, to turn things absolutely inside out and upside down. Because as we use terms like salam aleikum over and over again, we forget that their meaning is quite distinct from reality, both in our greetings, in our leave takings, and in the words we use to describe what we're doing in our classrooms. Now I want to go back to the peacock. Could people see, it's incidentally, when I ask people where they think that that's a piece of cloth, I mean, it's a picture of a piece of cloth. And when I ask people where the cloth is from, if they're from Mexico, they say it's from Mexico. People tend to, or if they were a tourist in a country, you know, they say, well, I went to Chile and I saw some cloth like that in Chile. It comes from a country in West Africa called Benin, Benin. And in Benin, they have huge mud huts with straw roofs where they have tapestries which illustrate the history of each dynasty. And people sew these figures. They sew figures of people and boats and swords and guns and birds to illustrate their history. One of the reasons that I chose this segment of a tapestry, it's just a segment. There are 20 other figures on the same tapestry. The tapestry is probably 5 meters by 4 meters. But I chose this because you can see that there's quite a variety of colors. And I wanted to remind people that in our classrooms, sometimes the variety of colors or the variety of activities is not as broad as in this figure. So it's kind of I used it as kind of an inspiration to remind you of all the possibilities of combining colors in different ways or combining activities in different ways. So that's one of the reasons I use that bird. Um, and again, if you're used to peacocks, you'll think it's a peacock. If you're used to turkeys, you might think it's a turkey. I don't have any idea what kind of a bird it really is, and it might be a kind of an imaginary bird rather than a real bird. But a peacock would serve the same purpose as that because a peacock also has quite a range of not only colors but textures in the different feathers that they use. And then Kumiko says like a kaleidoscope. Yeah, in my book, Try the Opposite, instead of a peacock or a bird on the cover, I put a kaleidoscope. Because in the same way, a kaleidoscope has a large range of colors. If you tilt it just a little bit, you have a totally new design. So that's the advantage of the kaleidoscope over my bird, because the bird is stationary. Except you can imagine the bird flapping its wings or its tail, and then you could see a whole new combination of colors. Now, I want to go to the next section, which is the most important section, and that is I'd like you each to ask at least one question of something that you want to deal with as we continue this conversation tonight. What are some topics, some questions you have related to anything you want? And just start typing them in. I don't know. SYKE and Dina, could you just tell me, is a peacock a peaceful bird? I see you both have that as the national, well, in India it's the national, oh, in Indonesia and India it's the national. Is that a peaceful bird or is kind of a not peaceful bird? To, I need, oh wow. I'm glad you're asking about, your questions. Will someone tell me if a peacock is a peaceful bird too? Um, but I'm glad that you were not distracted by this irrelevant question. You're focusing on the question um, about, what you want to talk about. A rare bird. No one about peaceful. Well, it's not terribly important. It's just that the eagle is the national bird of the United States, which I think is not a very peaceful bird. So that's why I was curious, because these national symbols sometimes we forget the underlying symbolism. So only if provoked. Is that what Alan says? So peacocks can be very aggressive if provoked. Eagles, I think, can be aggressive even if they aren't provoked. Now, let's go to the first question from PAH. I'm sorry, Pari Adi. I'm terrible with pronunciation. Is breaking rules something to do more on teachers or students? Ultimately, students have to learn or feel comfortable with doing things differently also. I was teaching a class yesterday. Stephen said we were doing some video work, and I asked the students not to use their erasers, to simply edit, cross out things that they wrote incorrectly, use carets to put in things that they didn't write. And one student was very disturbed because he wanted his notebook to be neat. So I said, well, you can recopy, rewrite after you make the corrections, and then it will be very neat. But he was very disturbed because I asked him to break a rule that he was used to. So if you break a rule, it's going to be a shock to the students. And as you break a rule, they're going to have to act differently. So breaking rules affects students and teachers equally. I don't think breaking rules needs more preparation time. In fact, I think if you record your lessons, which I'm going to be talking about in the next few weeks, and you transcribe or have the students transcribe even one A4 page, you can plan the lesson, some changes in your lesson using this transcription, and it will take less time than if you plan in the usual way. So it need not take more preparation time. Initially, it might, but long term, it won't. And Liz says, how do you justify breaking rules? Well, I justify it by saying that first, we're not sure what we're doing. The only way to clarify what we're doing is to make a slight change in what we're doing, and then we see what we're doing more clearly. So again, the idea is not to break rules to be rebellious or necessarily to think out the box. Some of those earlier comments that you made, which are fine. I mean, you can also break rules to be outside the box, all these reasons that you all listed. But another reason to break the rule is to become more aware of what we're doing. So I justify breaking rules on the basis of being aware of what we're doing. As I said before, we follow rules or routines or habits without knowing them. So if you make a little change, you realize what your habits are. So that's how I justify it, Liz. Now, Josette in Daegu, I visited Daegu some years ago. What happens when you have very little support around breaking rules? What happens is you can't tell many people, and you can't break a lot of rules. I mentioned yesterday asking the students not to use erasers. Over time, they get used to that, and it's okay. So if you ask the students to look out the window instead of looking at the board in front of the room, you don't need much support for that. People just kind of get used to the small change, and it isn't so kind of provocative. So if you make too many changes and you make them in a rebellious way, then you're going to have more criticism and more pressure not to change. So changes that don't kind of make people annoyed in the beginning, changes that you can discuss with your students and say, why am I doing this instead of that? I think it's okay. And you won't have so much pressure not to do it. Oh, we're back to the birds. So, in Indonesia, we tend to do them automatically. What if we want to change our routines? Well, you have to have in your lesson plan today, instead of asking only questions that begin with W, I'm going to ask these 5 questions that begin with is, and these 5 questions that begin with do. You write those in your plan, and then you look at your plan and ask those questions. So that'll be one way to change the automatic behavior. 90% of questions the teachers ask begin with W. So if you write down 10 that begin with do or is or are, that'll help you change that routine. And getting back to this idea of people getting upset, that's a kind of a change that is not rebellious, is not going to make people feel terrible. They'll just get accustomed to it. And it will expand the range of the activities you do, just like expanding when the peacock opens up the feathers. It's the same thing. It'll be a slightly new look, but it won't be disturbing. It might be even more attractive than what you were doing before. There are students who won't write with a pen until the answers are revealed. I know that. And one thing that I've done is I have 2 sheets of paper. One is the practice sheet, not the regular notebook. And I say, write on that. And then after you write on that, nobody's going to look at it. Then you can use your pen and write the answers as they're revealed. And then they can compare their initial answers with the revealed answers. They can compare what you could call the scrap paper, the blank piece of paper that you gave them. Even a newspaper, they can write on a newspaper or use newspaper. That's the scrap paper. So write what you think and then compare what you thought initially with what the revealed answer is. And I'm only going to look at the revealed answer that you wrote in your notebook. I'm not going to look at the scrap paper. So, and again, an example of a very small change, doesn't cost anything, and the students might feel comfortable, and over time they'll see that, oh, they get quite a few okay on the scrap paper before the revealed answer. So it might then make them feel more comfortable giving answers before seeing the right answer. Now, Vera says sometimes we need to change the rules to keep students concentrated. I have to say I agree with you about 200%. And one thing that I think is an advantage of breaking rules over time is that routine makes people bored. So the slightest change engages people in a slightly different way. Now, some people asked before, Now, Kumiko, when you say rules are sometimes boring for students because they're stereotyped, what kind of rules are boring for students? Incidentally, I'm surprised that nobody put down anything about grammar when we said breaking rules because so Kumiko, would you say what do you mean by the rules are sometimes boring? Kumiko, would you type that in? Oh, so Kumiko, the routine is the textbook manual, right? The textbook says you have to do this in the same way every day. Well, I understand that, but as I said, we have to change them. Some people were interested in the slides, so let me just give you something slightly different to do for a minute. You don't have to do this on screen. You can just write this. This is my introduction. It's 42 minutes into the session. Usually this is at the beginning. So this is breaking a rule. Instead of introducing myself first, I'm introducing myself after 42 seconds of discussion and question and answer. So why don't you write this, and then we'll talk about what assumptions a teacher would have to present an introduction in this format rather than in the usual format.
John, do you want people to type this into the chat or just write it on their own notebooks?
Um, just write it. Just write in your own notebooks.
Okay.
We'll compare what people write. They can say, aloud instead of putting it onto the chat board. Since you're reading about me, I'm going to leave for a minute. That's breaking a rule, having the teacher leave the classroom. But I'm still there because my introduction is still there.
Thank you, Pariati. Just try to keep this on your own notes, and then John will discuss it with everyone in a few minutes. That's very funny, Liz. I just told Pariati to continue with your introduction in his own notebook. And nice to see you back, John.
Mm-hmm. So you can look at this one now. This gives a little more information than the initial one. This is partly in response to Woody's comment, that this was done after an introduction that was done aloud. Otherwise, students will have no idea. Some of you were not used to the kind of format, so you didn't have, I won't say you didn't have any idea, but it was baffling because the amount of information was too small. So here's a little more information. And now Aniko, with this additional information, says it's easier to do. Nino says this one's better. And then this one. Now back to the original. So Nico, when you say what is the sign standing for in the second sentence, which sign? Is it the first symbol on the left or the second symbol? Nico says, oh, is it an I? Yes, it is an I. So that question that you asked, is it an I? Okay. The first question was, what is the sign standing for in the second sentence? The second one is it an I? In the first sentence, you're asking me for information. In the second question, you're saying, I have a hypothesis. Is my hypothesis true or false? The more students ask a yes/no question, is it an I, the more they're using their brains. If they continually say things like, what is the sign standing for? It means that we're not giving them enough information so that they can make a hypothesis. So, Aniko, for some reason, you started by thinking you didn't know because I didn't provide enough information. But then somehow your mind started to work, and then suddenly you said, is it an I? So that's what we want. That's what I want. More yes/no questions on the part of learners, because then they're hypothesizing. And if they do not hypothesize, it's not their fault or our fault. It's just that the amount of information we give is insufficient. Then Alice says I and past tense. Now, if you go to the first line, hello, as you know, my name is John, the equal sign before the J, uppercase J, is what about 90% of students write when I say, could you draw a sketch for the word is? 90% of students from countries around the world draw an equal sign. And for R, they draw either 3 lines or 2 equal signs. And for was, they draw an equal sign with an arrow pointing to the left. So some students get this faster than some teachers because they're used to text messaging. So they're used to seeing just part of the information because they have to save money to get just a certain number of letters in their text. So you'll be surprised, I think, when you try some of these things. Now, I'm not saying you should say it like this, but as I say, one of the goals, one of our roles as teachers is to manipulate the amount of information. And if you start with this, it's okay, but they can say all of these words and they have no idea what they mean. As long as they know the Roman script, they can say anything. I mean, they can say the words, but they don't know what they're saying necessarily. But if you give incomplete information, part of the information, which is what this slide shows, then they have to know a little bit more, and you know if they understand. And if you do something like this, when they see a basketball here, and they realize that, oh, it's a basketball, then you know that they understand it. The same with is in the first line. So one thing here again is getting back to some of you said, well, if I break the rules, will the other teachers be bothered, or will the principal get upset? There are little rules like this that you can change. You can omit words. I mean, you know that some of you do this anyway. You do different kind of C tests or closed tests or something. But here's another way to do it where you combine symbols, which the students generate inside. The students create the symbols, and then you put the symbols in the passage. I lowered my camera, Jeff, in Okinawa. You said thank you, so it came out okay. Now, let's look at 18. Again, getting back to my introduction, using a basketball and an equal sign, and an equal sign with an arrow pointing to the left, some blanks. Here I've got three formats for the same sentence. What are the assumptions that a teacher would have to do this kind of a presentation on the whiteboard in class, instead of just writing in the usual way what Paramitha just wrote, I love pizza and wine. So I love pizza and wine. Why not write I love pizza and wine? Why go through this, 4 sketches and a symbol for and? The words are spelled in a different way, and they're in the top one. It looks like it's a crossword puzzle. What assumptions does the teacher have? Josette, I think you're right that it may be very engaging, but what are the assumptions that the teacher has to do I love pizza in these 3 different ways, or to do hello, as you know, my name is John. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, the home of the Chicago Bulls basketball team, and the name of a jazz musical. Elicit correct spelling. Alexandra, to work with meanings, not with words. Students can teach each other. One will know about jazz. A lot of the females know about the jazz musical. A lot of the males know about the Chicago Bulls. Not all of them, but some. So they can help each other because they will each know some different things. Again, Josette, students can figure it out. The assumption is that the students can figure out that the students can do more than we think they can do. They have background knowledge, says Sherry. They love to be challenged. Alan, background knowledge. Challenging. Buddha, what is the CHAA? I'm not. Is that short for challenger, or is that another word? Marwa, in the second example of the pizza, or the second example of the introduction? Marwa, or in the pizza, right. So some people, if they see sketches, they can get it. Their literacy skills, their mastery of some of the letters in English, they're not so good. Leslie is going to sneak out by the side door. Well, thanks for coming in from Canberra. Good to have you. More assumptions? How can I work in this way with students with 8-year-old and doesn't know to read and write very well? Vera, well, if they can't read and write very well, then I would use a lot of the pictures like this, and I would just say them, and then I would ask them to draw them. So first you can put on a whiteboard, I love pizza and wine. Well, not with 8-year-olds, you're not going to say I love pizza and wine. You're going to say I love pizza and Coca-Cola, I love pizza and orange juice. And then you say I love, and you say cake, and then they draw a cake and milk. I love cookies and milk. So they can match sketches and symbols with the language that you're saying without having to write it. Now, Paramita, I want to show everybody something, because in my experience, this kind of a sentence, I love pizza and wine, or pizza and Coca-Cola, is very unusual. Often we use the symbol heart for love, a picture of pizza, and a picture for wine or Coca-Cola orange juice, but I have rarely seen function words with a picture, like this is I. I mean, this is one symbol for I, and earlier I had an I instead of that. So this is the normal thing that we do with 8-year-olds, which I think is very detrimental to learning. And I want you to tell me why you think, why. Incidentally, this is a rule around the world. Here's a rule around the world for 8-year-olds, 5-year-olds. So this is detrimental to learning. And it's very different, very, very different from I like pizza and Coca-Cola. So first, why does John say this is detrimental to learning? And how is it different from I love pizza and Coca-Cola? Dina, I'll get to that question. In fact, I'll type an answer now, but while you're thinking about the next one. Andrea, why are we not, you're right, why are we not asking students to think? And Rose, you're right, it doesn't relate anything to the word list. Students are passive and being spoon-fed the information. Rima, yep. Wow. The question is, why are these so popular? I see these all over the world in elementary school classrooms, put on the notice boards in hallways and in classrooms, and I see parents buying these and wasting a lot of money saying these things to their children. But Andrea, you're right, it's not challenging enough. It's not asking them to think. Why is it not asking them to think? That's what I would like people to dwell on. And Alan says it's a classic misspelling, right? And Nico says there's no context. Why else is this detrimental? Paramitha, you think it's good for a thematic lesson plan? It could be, but I still think it's detrimental. So keep thinking why I think it's detrimental, even though it could be good for a thematic lesson plan. And simple matching exercise, Andrea, I agree. Without context, I agree. Activating the language, I'm not sure. And here again, getting back to what I said before, somebody said they wanted me to illustrate these two columns. So here's the way to do it. Let's take activating the language. And then juxtapose that with not activating the language. I'm going to type that up on the screen now. So activating the language, not activating the language. Then you take a couple of activities or a couple of answers that the students give and put it in either under activating the language or not activating the language. And then the ones you put under activating the language, you say, how is this not activating the language? And the examples that you had under not activating the language, you put on how are these potentially activating the language. Yeah, they'll forget it easily. Why will they forget it easily? There's no question they'll forget it easily. The second picture, Vera, which is the second picture? We're looking at the fruits. I need the Vera to answer that. Well, I don't know, Alan, what activating is easier, but that's why when Andrea said that, I said you have to write examples of what you mean by activating and not activating. Most of the terms we use to describe what we're doing don't mean anything. And that's why I started with breaking rules. What does breaking rules mean to you? How is it positive? How is it negative? So what's activating? What's not activating? Now, Vera, when you said great, what? I mean, I know great, but why is the second picture great and useful to students? You mean the second picture with all of the fruits, or the second picture, the banana? I need Vera to answer that. Nico, circling the fruit you like, getting back to Alan's point about what's activating language, circling the fruit you like rather than repeating banana, I think is more activating than repeating banana. So there's one example, Alan. We need more examples, but the whole point is whatever term we use, we need examples to match the term, and then we have to see how the examples don't match the term. Now let me just point out why I think that this chart is detrimental. I mean, there are a lot of reasons. One is that the word, of course, fruits is misspelled on the top. That's, in a way, a trivial point. But could you count how many bananas you see? I mean, it's a stupid question. There are at least 3. So they're learning from the beginning 5 bananas. I think you're right. And notice it's AS, but there's no S there. So from the beginning, they're learning words totally as only vocabulary items, no integration of grammar and vocabulary. And the only reason we have meaning in any language is to combine grammar and vocabulary. People learn words like bananas and watermelons and oranges very easily. This is the problem. There are 4 words there. Do you like oranges? The difficult words are do and you and like, not oranges. And the other difficulty is the word order. Do followed by you, followed by like, followed by oranges. Now, when I ask students I put a sentence like that. Please write this sentence. I like oranges better than grapes. Or I have this on the whiteboard and I ask a student to come up and I ask them to draw a circle around the words that they think are difficult. And 90% draw a circle around oranges and grapes. They've seen I a million times. They've seen like 500,000, no, but frequently. And they've seen better and they've seen than. But they don't know how to use these words. So we tend to teach lexical items like this on charts in isolation, and that's why I think it's detrimental. Words have meaning. A number of you mentioned context. Even before the context has to be some kind of a sentence, and then the sentence is within a context. So we're going shopping, pretending we're going shopping. Oh, I like oranges better than grapes. Do you like oranges? I don't like oranges. Do you like apples? I like strawberries better than apples. Do you like pears? That's the issue. I like better than not the oranges and grapes. So the whole focus on the lexical item, totally separated from any kind of grammar, first teaches them incorrect English. So if they memorize all of these words, they will use them incorrectly for the rest of their lives. But secondly, there's no real meaning. So here's again this activating students' prior knowledge. And again, what does that mean? Examples of that, and then what isn't activating students' prior knowledge. And when you say banana and ask them to repeat, it probably is not activating students' prior knowledge. If you say, did you have bananas for breakfast? It's related to their prior knowledge. It's related to their personal experience for that day. Aniko, they learn that grammar is a chunk if it's taught as a chunk, but they will not learn grammar as a chunk if they look at this page. They will only learn grammar as a chunk if we present it in chunks. I like bananas. Bananas are yellow. Tomatoes are red. Grapes are purple. Melons are green. Strawberries are red. That's a chunk. If they don't, Alan, you don't have to agree. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Let me tell you the first. Yeah, here's a test to act. This is my answer to Alan. I don't think I call it detrimental, just not meaningful. And this is only part of the message. I mean, you got to fill in a lot on this. There are just 2 words, and 2 words are missing. So Marissa believed nothing. That's the 2 words. And then before the exclamation point, there are 2 more words, which are not there, so you have to fill them in. So believe nothing, that's the first part of the sentence. And the end of the sentence is then a subject and a verb. Believe nothing, subject, verb. Aniko, the second word that you wrote is not correct, but the word that you have to write begins with S. So, and you is okay, but it refers to me. Do you believe nothing? Believe nothing you hear, believe nothing you see. Those are all fine, and they're all true. They're a little different from mine. They're an expansion of mine. So, Aniko, believe nothing I say. Yeah. So believe nothing John says. Believe nothing you hear, I would agree with that. Believe nothing you see initially, but always kind of look at it again and see what else it could be, what else it could mean. So all of the projections you made or all the guesses you made, I accept. But this is what I wanted to remind Alan. If I say it's detrimental and you don't think it's detrimental, it's not to believe me, it's to ask a few people, ask the students if they think it's detrimental, to look at the effects over a couple of months when you teach words totally in isolation, without any context, without any grammatical meaning, and when you show words that are basically incorrect, because banana is not English, tomato is not English. It's either a tomato or tomatoes. So to teach words that do not really exist the way they're presented, I think that's why I say it's detrimental. And then here's another task which might be more activating. They have to take the fruit and put it in the shape. And many teachers say, well, because they can put the fruit in the place where it belongs, they can read the words so they know that banana is banana. But you can do the shapes even if you white out all the words. You don't have to know the words. So it shows nothing. But again, we project because they do it, we think they understand. So, Alan, of course, it's detrimental depending on how it's used, but 9 times out of 10, it's used by having the students repeat tomato, banana, melon, grape, orange, because that's what's on the chart. And as long as those words are there in isolation without the article or the S on them, it's not English. So just for fun, I mean, not for fun, and we'll see if it's for fun. If you were walking on the street, as I was, and saw this building, what do you think is the job of the people who are renting this building? Well, it turns out Alan said it's an audio specialist. That's what it is, but it could be musicians because they want to highlight, that we want people to listen. Aniko says it could be a psychologist because the psychologist wants them to listen. So if I contrast my questions about this house and ear, nose, throat doctor, we've got now at least 5 different possibilities. But if we go back to there's only one answer. It's right and wrong. So I think that when you have peacocks or birds or things like this, where there are multiple answers possible, now, of course, you all answered with individual words. In an English class, I wouldn't allow that. I would say, I think musicians work here. I think a psychologist works here who would listen to people. I think an ear, nose, and throat doctor works here. I think an audio specialist works here. I would have the frame on the board. I think that works here. And then they would fill in the various options. And then each student can project what they think might be there. And all of them are possible. The fact that it happens to be an audio specialist really is not very important because, again, the point is to practice the pattern of the language with a lot of different substitutions. And if the substitutions come from the students rather than from you, they're thinking about the meaning. I think an audiologist owns this building. I think a psychologist owns this building. I think musicians own this building. I think an ear, nose, and throat doctor owns this building. I think a throat doctor rents this building. I think a psychologist rents this building. we're practicing I think, building. Structural words and sentence patterns with different words substituted and put in. That to me is our role as a teacher, and if you put part of the frame on the board, the structure and a couple of the words, structural or function words, then they will practice integrating vocabulary and grammar, and they will produce meaning, and the meaning will be from their experience, and no right answer except I cannot say, I think ear, nose, throat doctor rent. No, it has to be, I think a nose, ear, and throat doctor rents the building. Not rent building, rents the building. I think musicians rent the building. So we have to focus on the integration of structural words and sentence patterns and lexical items over and over and over again. And every time we do a word chart that are produced by people, I think we forget and we give students the impression that if they won't learn individual words, they somehow will learn English or Hungarian. It doesn't matter what language you're teaching, it's all the same. The words have to be in a chunk at the minimum and a sentence better, and used in questions and answers with multiple uses of the same pattern. Now, I don't want to just criticize these publishers who make mistakes and sell these to make a lot of money to parents. This is a page from a very widely used dictionary. And you see, this does the same thing. There's a context, it's an office. But if students simply know, when they look at that picture, or if they think that if they look at that picture and they see words like mouse pad, scanner, drawer, keyboard, that they're learning English. They're not. They're learning they're learning to use count nouns incorrectly by looking at this page and trying to master it. So I think this is a travesty. If you have a dictionary like that, I would go through it and ask the students to correct it and put in the articles belong there. Even better, I would cross out all the words and write sentences there saying, the swivel chair is blue. The mouse pad is also blue. The bulletin board is blue. The disk drive is gray. The keyboard is black. The frame for the laptop is gray. The file cabinet is also black. In a context, over and over and over, not words in isolation without articles. We talk about something called fossilization, that students don't use these words correctly. I don't think it's fossilization. I think they are taught incorrectly from the beginning, and that's why they don't use the words correctly. Now back to some questions. We did a few questions, but I want more questions on the kinds of things that you want to discuss both tonight and those that are continuing with the course, the ones that you want to talk about as we continue. So a couple of more questions. Some things we've said tonight, other issues or concerns that you have. Josette, this is not a question. You made a statement, but I think it's an important statement, so I want to repeat. I think we make teaching too complicated. The simpler, the better. Over and over, how can we make what we do simple? Simple directions, simple activities, not complicated. Often the students can't do the task we set, not because they don't know the language, but they don't know what we want them to do, because we make the activity so complicated. task-based instruction is an example of, to me, some that is too complicated rather than simple. And a lot of people can't do it well, partly because of that. Questions, questions, questions. Liz, I don't think unless you have a lot of time, I don't think we should make our own materials. I think that we should use materials that are available. Most schools have a textbook that they want you to use, and I think we should use it, but we should use it as a different way. For example, if every student has a copy of this dictionary, as I said, the first thing I would ask them to do is to cross out all the words on the page, and then you would say some sentences. They would write the sentences on the page that taught the vocabulary items together with the patterns and ways that we use the vocabulary items. So they would have a page filled with sentences and questions. How many files are there on the shelf? How many books are there on the shelf? How many mouse pads are there on the shelf? How many drawers are there in the file cabinet? For example. So we'd use the materials, but you would use them slightly differently so that they would be more productive and the students would write a great deal more language. Now, Josette is curious about next week. We're going to talk about how we can generate much more language. 90% of classrooms around the world, the teacher talks 3/4 of the time and the students 1/4. Maybe the teacher talks 2/3, the students 1/3. Part of what we'll be doing in the next 4 sessions is some activities where the teacher says hardly anything and the students write. First they write a lot and then they say what they've written. They read a lot silently and then they read aloud things that they've read silently. The teacher is there to give feedback and give the task. So you could write down this rule. Never explain vocabulary. Never explain grammar. Those are 2 rules. Never explain grammar and never explain vocabulary. That's what we'll be doing the next week, showing how you can follow that rule. Never explain vocabulary. Never explain grammar. Never define words. That's another way to say it. Never ask students to define words. We'll be following those rules. Never do those things. No, Rose, you can't ask students. We asked this so-called communicative language teaching. We give students a topic, talk about Martin Luther King in pairs, and then report to the group. That's not teaching. So what we'll be doing the next few weeks is showing how you give guided, controlled patterns to students to practice, manipulate, use meaningfully until they become their own. Then they can talk about Martin Luther King. But we do not do nearly enough asking the students to practice language. In most countries, language learning is still seen as a subject to be learned, memorized. It's content rather than a skill. So the number of times the students experience a particular pattern is maybe 3 or 4 times. They have to experience the same pattern 30, 40, 50 times on 2 or 3 different days. They have to hear there's one swivel chair in the office. There's one file cabinet in the office. There are 3 drawers in the office. There's one telephone in the office. There are 4 files in the office. There's 1 plant in the office. How many plants are there in the office? There's 1 plant in the office. How many blue swivel chairs are there in the office? There's 1 blue swivel chair. Over and over, hearing them, writing them, reading them silently, saying them orally after they read them silently. Now, Nino, I can't agree with you more. They were taught the wrong way in the beginning, and they were taught vocabulary rather than language. All the books separate out vocabulary and language. I don't know why they do that. Language is meaning, and meaning comes from structural words, sentence patterns, lexical items, and a context in which we use them. Arzu, I want you to correct the sentence you typed. You said, in Turkey, most teachers think that the more they explain the rules to students, the more they learn. Substitute the world for Turkey. In the world, most teachers think that the more they explain the rules to students, the more they learn. Remember, don't believe anything I say, but I just want you to consider substituting in the world. Sherry, thank you for joining us. Well, there Nino confirms the world. So we have in Turkey and Indonesia and Japan and and Jeff put in Japan, in Korea, in the world. You can start breaking today. Well, Josette, you can start breaking today, but you might lose your job. So remember, I'm talking about small changes. So you either at the beginning of the lesson, the end of the lesson, you write the rule on the board. You say, copy down this rule, class. This is very important, and I want you to memorize it. Then you do your practicing. You're actually using the language, and then they learn it. And then they also think that they know the rule, and they think that because they know the rule, they can use the language. So if you don't explain, this is such an ingrained habit that students are used to, you're going to have trouble. Earlier, someone said, when we break rules, are they for the students or the teacher? And I say they're for the students and the teacher. So if you break this rule, and if you do what I say, like never explain grammar, you're going to be in trouble. So I would explain. I say that just to kind of get your attention, partly. But you explain the rule, then you do practice, you do actual learning language. So they have both. They're learning something, and they also get what they think is important. Have to remember what students think is important, even if we don't think it's important. Over time, they'll realize maybe it isn't, but they think it is. And Rose, I agree with you. Breaking is not easy. That's why I'm saying don't break it immediately. Don't break it completely. Do it plus. I mentioned before that I was in Somalia, and in Somalia they say nabad. When they greet you, that means peace. When the teachers did not teach grammar, during the break between classes, their students threw stones at them. That was their way of saying, we want you to teach us grammar. So I said, teach the grammar, and then do the other things in addition. So please, when I say these extreme things, realize that they're extreme things and don't completely change. Continue to teach grammar, but less. Give more the rule, and then a lot of practice, a lot of manipulation of the language. Let them see the grammar pattern in the reading passage. Fine. So we're going to expand the range of activities. That's what I said at the beginning. We're not going to eliminate. We're going to expand. And when we expand, we'll change the proportion of time. So if you spend 10 minutes now explaining the rules, after a month, you might explain for 5 minutes. And after 2 months, you might explain for 3 minutes. And then you might say, for homework, I want you to read the rule in the textbook and write it 5 times. So then you don't have to deal with it in class. They've written the rule 5 times, they've memorized it, and then you're doing the practice in class. And then they can see, as they begin to master the patterns and say more and more correctly and make fewer mistakes when they write, they will see that what you're doing is useful. You don't have to tell them it's useful. In fact, if you tell them it's useful, they won't believe you. Either they will see that it's useful and then therefore realize it's good for them and want to do more of it, then it won't be a problem. And they'll decrease their interest in grammar rules and the pressure, and they'll say, gee, I've been doing these grammar rules forever, and it's been less useful than what we've been doing recently in class. Now, Dina, they have to learn more outside the class? Well, many of them don't have time to learn outside of class. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that over time, you can move from explaining all the grammar in class to explaining part of the grammar in class and having them write some for homework. If they don't do homework, then you can't do that. Then you have to do it all in class, but you can decrease the amount of time devoted to explaining grammar and increase the amount of time you can practice. And in the next sessions, we'll talk about different ways to practice. Having said that, they cannot learn enough in class because there aren't enough hours. So the students who really want to master, they have to learn ways to listen on their own outside of class, to do transcriptions, and we'll be talking about those things in the next couple of weeks. Now, Rose, I think that's why we end up not giving change a try, afraid of doing it. Well, partly we're afraid because we make too many changes, I think, and the changes are too big. So what I'm advocating tonight and forever, as I just said, if you explain a grammar rule for 10 minutes, if that's the normal thing to do, cut it down to 8. And then you got 2 more minutes for practice or for doing activities or exercise in the book, and then cut it down to 7. So you don't have to be so afraid of that, changing 1 or 2 minutes. In fact, in the beginning, they might not even notice. Heavy rain just started in Okinawa. We had rain in India earlier. Yeah, not drastic, Rose. That's a better way of saying it. Decrease the amount of time slowly, incrementally. There'll be some small change, but not a drastic one. That's what we're about. Well, the students are going to compare with former teachers, Rima, and that's why I'm telling you, don't make the changes too drastic. That's what Rose just said again. Decrease the amount, change slowly. And as you make the change, if the thing that you're doing that's different from what they're used to is useful, when they compare you to the previous teacher, they will do it in a positive way, not a negative way. If the things that you change and the new activities you ask them to do are not better, then it's not good for you or them. So again, the subtitle of Breaking Rules is Generating and Exploring Alternatives. So first you make the change, and then you have to explore the result. And if the result is not better, then the alternative should not be continued. The alternative must be better and show better results. Now, this is John's introduction in a different format. Please do not type this out on the chat screen, but please write in your notebook, John's introduction. This is John's introduction in a different format. I mean, as you can see, it's a different format because it looks like nonsense. But try to write in your notebook the words represented by these initial letters. Yeah, Nino, repeat that 100 times. The alternatives must have better results. The alternatives must have better results. Absolutely critical. Okay, Jeff, bye-bye. So let's try this other alternative of John's introduction. Dina, break one rule. So change, I will try to break a rule then. Okay, I don't want you to get fired. I don't want the students to walk out of your class. So I have class tomorrow, and I'll try to break a rule for maybe 5 minutes. Not too many. Okay. Nemo, the first word is hello. It's the same as my introduction before, but presented in a different format. So, Nemo, it doesn't make sense to me. So the first word is hello. And as Aniko just reminded us, it's the same text you had to fill in before, where I gave you the initial letter. I drew some symbols for is and was, and I drew a basketball, and I drew an eye. So Nino, I'm sorry. What led you to wow? Could you type in what led you to? Don't continue typing the introduction, but I just want you to type in how you got to wow. Is it Nemo? Nemo, how did you get to wow? Rosa, it's presenting the same text in a different way, and the question is why. I presented it now in 4 different ways. Say more, Nino. I didn't think about this before, that we could actually do this, hence wow. But what led you to the wow? Because initially you said you couldn't get it, but now you started to get it. So what was it that either I said or somebody else typed that got you to say it? Poppy Landon, why did you remember almost everything? Let's just going back to this idea of not getting people too frustrated. One way to do it is to give this one first, the complete text. As you know, my name is John. And then you can even have a map in the classroom. You can have a picture of a basketball team. You can have a picture of Michael Jordan. You can have a picture of jazz showing a couple of singers and a couple of dancers. And then you can go from the complete introduction Two, they just have to remember part of it. You just take out a few letters. And in fact, you can ask them to write it on the whiteboard and see what they leave out. You don't have to do this. Forget, as long as you get the principle that you decrease the amount of information, then here we not only decrease the amount of information, but we combine information from letters, linguistic information, to symbolic information. So they have to use a different part of their brain. Now, to present this reading passage 4 times, I think they will learn less than if you present the same patterns 4 times in at least 4 different formats. And when you ask the students to present them in different formats, they'll come up with things like this. These are from students. They came up with this crossword puzzle format. They came up with spelling the words, rearranging the letters. They came up with these images. They cut out pictures from magazines. So if you ask the students to take a reading text and present it in different formats, assuming they understand it, they'll come up with all sorts of things. Look, they've developed text messaging with no rules and no teachers. They do text messaging all the time. Now dictionaries have started to put in rules for text messaging, but most adults do not know some of these rules. The students learn them on their own without memorizing one. They simply said, how can I express this meaning? So they wrote LOL, lots of love. Nobody told them to do it. They came up with it. So this idea of one letter, the initial letter for each word in the text, and no spaces in uppercase letters, is something that kids who do text messaging have been doing for years. So this is not going to be new to them. I mean, it's going to be new to them in the classroom. But I think it's important to present the same. They should read the same material 4 or 5 times if you want them to master the patterns. But if you ask them to read the same thing in the same way 4 or 5 times, I think it's going to bore them out of their minds. So you change the format. Then you take out John, Chicago, Illinois, Chicago Bulls basketball team, and name jazz musical, and they say, as you know, my name is Rose. I was born in the home of the soccer team, and the name of the whatever it is. They personalize for their own experience using the patterns which you want them to master. And then instead of saying hello, they can say hi. They can say good day. They can say peace. And instead of as you know, you can say as you might remember. You can fill in different things, but they're constantly practicing I was born in. And then you can say, Rose, was John born in Chicago or in New York? Oh, John was born in Chicago. Ah, Chicago. He was born in Chicago, Illinois. Do the Chicago Bulls have their home in Chicago, Illinois? Yes, the Chicago Bulls have their home in Chicago, Illinois. So you're manipulating a small bit of language in many different ways, and they have a chance to master it 30, 40, 50 different times for 2 or 3 minutes a day. So you do this for 2 or 3 minutes one day, then you go another day with another format, 2 or 3 minutes, another day another format, another day this format, and then you go back and you say, okay, now your story, not my story, your story. Hello, as you know, my name is Rose. I was born in whatever. So, and then the next step, of course, is yes/no questions, question word questions about the passage, which they ask each other, they ask orally, and then they write the question. So they're doing reading, writing, listening, and speaking with controlled, guided patterns, learning structural words and sentence patterns in a reasonably normal context, because most people at some point have to introduce themselves. Now, obviously, you can't just do introductions during the whole year, but it's an example. So you can, introductions, you can do which fruits you like, which meat you like, which meat you don't like, whatever. So anyway, these are some of the things we'll be expanding on in the next few weeks. And just to remind you, let's go back to, if you think of John's introduction the same way you think of a jigsaw puzzle, you know, everything is mixed up over here on the right. So you begin sorting things out. And then some people will take the 4 corner pieces first and put them in the corners. And then they say, now let me put all the black pieces together and all the pink pieces together and all the light blue pieces together. That's the same process that people use when they go to something like I Like Pizza or John's introduction. They group things, try it in one arrangement, and then move it into another arrangement and see what makes sense. Here it's not linguistic sense, it's visual sense, but the process is the same. Is it this or is it that? And you don't have to teach people this. What you have to do is give them the language that they can put together in different ways that make sense. That makes sense. Get them to think about the language, meaning, and information. Yes. Now, Aniko, remember before I said if we don't give enough information, they're going to be frustrated, they're going to be baffled, and they might even be angry. So our task as a teacher to keep our eyes open, and if a student is kind of throwing his pencil on the floor or pounding his head against his desk, then you better go up to him and say, here's 3 words. Write them in his notebook. So when you couldn't get past the first line, if you were in a class where I could see you, I would have shown you that other slide with the full text for just a minute or two, then taken it away, and then you could have gone on. So if people are frustrated, it's a waste of time. But if you give them everything, it's also a waste of time. So this is the task for the teacher, to manipulate the amount and kind of information that you give. Remember, amount is how many letters. Do I give them 5 letters or 6 letters? The kind of information is different. The kind of information is, this is a basketball. I mean, maybe can't see it very well. This is not a basketball. This is a symbol. So this is a picture of what it is. This is a symbol. This is a symbol. This is a picture, but it's not a picture of what it is. It's a picture representing something abstract. I, a personal pronoun. But people get it immediately. They know that I doesn't make sense here. They know that it's the sound for the word. It's not the meaning of the picture. But that's what I mean by kind of information. So I decrease the amount of information by just giving you some letters. I show the information in different ways. Symbol, symbol, actual object, object but representing the sound, not the object. So those are 3 totally different ways of providing information. Yeah, it's giving information about you as well. And not everyone is interested in where the teacher's from, but if you give more information than your name, and you start giving more personal information about what you like, what you don't like, family, difficulties you had when you were growing up, they're interested in that. And if they then do the same thing about themselves, it shows them that you're interested in them as people. So that's why I think that this can be very useful, and you can use a very small text for many, many different segments of a period for even a couple of weeks. And it will not get tiring because you're changing the amount and kind of information. You're having them substitute their experience, and you're expanding the their knowledge of your experience and your life. See Rio de Janeiro, and then put up RJ rows, and then I'll also put RDJ, and see in which case they get more, RDJ or RJ. And just one final, we've got a few minutes.
Just when John finishes up here, I'm going to give you a little bit of information about next week and the video and the tape script that we'll be sending out. So just after you wrap up
All
here,
right,
John.
just this is the actual title of the book I mentioned at the beginning. You know, whatever you think the opposite. And most of you said it has to do with the IT or business or management. But Paul Arden did mirror writing, because if he did regular writing, fewer people would notice. So if you present things in novel ways, people will notice. So if you draw a basketball, that's a novel way. If you draw an equal sign for is, it's novel. But you can transfer this to reading passages. After you do My Name is John, as you know, My Name is John, the regular way, you can do mirror writing. This is another variation of an introduction. So can you read the title in mirror writing? It's an introduction. I mean, it's not it's about names. What's in a name? And the first line, my, it's about me, incidentally. My name is John. In Spanish, right? See, Arzu, right? Do you speak Spanish? You're reading Spanish. So in Spanish, my name is John. In German, it is Hans, whatever. So again, it's not unusual in a lot of settings to do mirror writing. When I'm in New York and I'm outside of a restaurant, sometimes the menu is in the window for people inside to look at it. So I have to read it backwards through the glass. And all of you who teach know that you can read upside down, because when you're walking around the room and looking at students' notebooks, you have to read what they wrote upside down. So writing upside down is another way that you can do mirror writing, upside down, text messaging, incomplete information, different kinds of information. So ladies and gentlemen, salam alaikum, nabad, shalom. Have a great week, and I very much enjoyed this. I followed the rule that I talked more than 50% of the time. Next time, I'm going to try to talk 40% instead of 50%. And by the end, I hope you'll do all the typing and some talking. So enjoy the week. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Oh, thank you, Rose. Thank you, everybody. Wow, good job, John. That's a 2 hour stretch. That's just you
I
just
had a
getting
big
warmed up.
sign here, take a break, but I ignored it.
So thank you, everybody, so much for coming. Yeah, it sure did not seem like 2 hours at all, did it? Thank you, Elspeth. So just to remind you again, up at the top, tonight was just to get people kind of caught up. Anybody who's taken this course in the fall when John did it, tonight was a chance to get caught up with the innovative, fun way that John thinks about things and sharing ideas. It was wonderful. This group was full of ideas and lots of things going back and forth. If you go up to the top corner and if you click on any of these, for example, the iTDi links, if you click on register for more, it brings you to the page. And just underneath it, browse to will take you to see those different pages. You can see our iTDi faculty, associates, mentors, and the 2 other courses we have. Thanks, Vera. Nice to meet you too. Thanks, Andrea, for sticking with it through your connection not working as much. Nino, very nice. Arzu, thank you, everybody. So I will send a copy of the tape script, which is this whole chat session that we've had. I'll send that as an attachment, plus I'll send you a link to the full um, video of this. And we hope that some of you, if you're not already registered, we have 30, I think 31 or 32 people registered for the course for next week. If you're not already registered, you're more than welcome to.
And
So
can they send
with that, we'll
comments and I
just
make comments during the week, Stephen?
yes, we certainly can. We will open, if you're registered in the iTDi website, all you go in and if you haven't, you just go in and create your own account. It's free to create an account. And then go to the social forum, and we'll have a new forum called More Breaking Rules. And in there, you can make comments. And John had a very lively forum going last fall when we did this course. So lots and lots of good stuff happened.